Right, good evening. Evening, everybody. Yes, tonight, unfortunately, what I want to do is issue a warning to you. And I want to warn you to be on the lookout for two little words. And these are words that you're likely to come across if you're doing any reading, for instance, to prepare a talk, or you might hear other speakers use these two words. You might actually use them yourselves, although hopefully after tonight you won't. How many people like me get involved in doing any training or coaching? Just so I can see. Most of you. And how many of you like to read about self-development or personal growth, that sort of thing? Mm-hmm. Yes, of course you do. Everybody does. Well, in that case, I guarantee you're going to come across these two words all the time. And what I want to happen after tonight is that when you do meet these words, a little alarm bell will go off in the back of your head, and you'll stop for a minute and think, oh, just a sec, Alan warned me about this. Because these two words, if you're not careful, can lead you into a world of trouble. And the two words are research shows. Research shows. Now at this point you might think, well, hang on Alan, we all like a bit of research, nothing wrong with that. And no, there isn't. There's nothing wrong with research as such. The problem is with those two words, because when you come across those words, research shows, you tend to assume that what comes next is accurate, relevant, and helpful. Actually, in my experience, what comes next tends to be misquoted, misused, or just downright wrong. And I'll give you two examples from lots that I could quote, but two examples that you may have come across. Very common ones with training and coaching particularly. First of all, research shows that people forget 77% of information that they try to remember within 2 days. I'll come back to that. Research shows, the second one, research shows that people who write down specific goals that they want to achieve far more than people who don't write down their goals. Now, both of those sound, well, it's quite interesting, that, actually. But let's have a look a bit more closely at those. First one, people forget 77% of information that they're trying to remember within about 2 days. That's from a piece of research which led to a model that trainers quote all the time called the curve of forgetting. The curve of forgetting. Hands up, anybody who's heard of the curve of forgetting? I know the number of people may have put their hands up, except now they're thinking, I'm not putting my hand up for that. Alan's about to tell me this is rubbish. The curve of forgetting is something that trainers quote a lot. And anybody know who came up with the curve of forgetting?
It's a German guy called Ebbinghaus.
What an erudite audience we have. Ebbinghaus, Hermann Ebbinghaus. Ebbinghaus and the curve of forgetting. Trainers love Ebbinghaus and the curve of forgetting. For trainers, that's up there with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, or Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. They get very excited about Ebbinghaus and the curve of forgetting, and it sounds very interesting. The only thing is, anybody like to guess when Ebbinghaus did that research? Decade will be close enough. Any decades you want to go for?
1900.
1900. Not far off. 1888. 125 years ago, Ebbinghaus did that research. Trainers are still talking about it. That was in the days before hardly anyone was doing any brain research or research on memory, so it's pretty cutting edge, but an awful lot's happened since then, frankly. Other thing, how did Ebbinghaus do his research? Well, he sat down and he tried to remember lists of hundreds of nonsense syllables. He wrote out 3-letter words like zag and bock that didn't mean anything, and he tried to remember them, and then he tested himself after regular intervals to see how many he'd forgotten. And that's how he came up with the curve of forgetting. My question is, how many of the trainers who quote Ebbinghaus's curve of forgetting realize that they're quoting research which is 125 years old and is based on a research group of Ebbinghaus? and if they did realize that, might they then not put that forward as a fact and put it forward instead of what it actually is. It's a theory, but based on a very limited amount of research done an awful long time ago. Second example, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this one. Research shows that people who write down specific goals that they want to attain prove to be far more successful than people who don't. That's based on some research which was supposed to have taken place in a famous university. Anyone like to hazard a guess? Oh, there's some going for Harvard, some going for Yale. Well, Harvard, Yale, Yale, Harvard. If you said Harvard or Yale, in a sense, you're both correct. In another sense, you're both completely wrong, apparently. Because I've seen this research attributed to both universities. In one account that I've seen, it was done at Yale University in 1953, where they took a group of students and they found out which students had written down specific goals they wanted to achieve and which ones hadn't. And then they looked at those students to see what had happened to them after 10 years, or in some accounts 20 years. And they found that the 3% who'd written down their goals were earning 10 times as much as the other 97% put together. But I've also seen exactly the same research, and that was supposed to be carried out at Harvard University in 1979. So it could be Yale, or it could be Harvard. Or it could be that the whole thing is actually a myth, because that research was never carried out. Because if you try and research that yourself now...
Can you move it back down there?
Yeah, I think that's a ghost of the person who did their research now. If you... So much for my video, thank you. I'm going to have to start from the beginning again now. Sorry. Good evening, everyone. What I want to do this evening is... Am I getting extra time for this?
Yeah.
Don't worry about it, they can hear me, they don't need to watch. Yeah, it's all right.
That's fine.
Who needs a video? If you look on the internet now and try and find that research, you'll find that there are a number of people in recent years who've actually invested quite a lot of time and effort trying to get to the source of that research. And frankly, it would be easier for them to find the source of the Nile than to find the source of that research, because they just can't find out who was supposed to have done it. And both Harvard and Yale now disclaim that. Both universities say there's no record anywhere of anyone ever doing any research like that. And they interviewed the students who were there in the relevant years, and they don't remember it either. Fair enough. The students who were there in 1953 are getting on a bit now and may not be the most reliable witnesses. But nobody knows where that came from. And yet, that research is quoted by Tony Robbins, Brian Tracy, until recently Zig Ziglar, until he passed away, obviously, doesn't now. And it's mentioned in the book, What They Don't Tell You at Harvard Business School. Well, maybe there's a good reason why they don't tell you about that at Harvard Business School, because somebody made it up. So the point I'm making, and why is this important for you as speakers or trainers or coaches, that the point I'm making is, when you come across those two words, research shows, you need to be very careful about it. And what I think you should do is, when you see those words in future, you think to yourself, does it? Does the research really show that? What research? When was that research done? Who did it? What was actually done? What were the results? Because a lot of people just repeat research that they've read an account of without ever checking it. And it gets a bit like Chinese whispers. One person reads it and thinks, oh, that's interesting, I'll mention that. But they change it slightly when they mention it, and then someone else hears it and thinks, oh, that's pretty good, that. I'll mention that, I'll write that down. And then eventually it becomes completely different from what the research actually was. Or somebody hears some research mentioned, and they don't bother to check whether that research ever actually existed or not. And in my experience, this happens a lot in training and coaching. People just repeat things, and the more it's repeated, the more people assume that it must be correct, and nobody ever goes back to check. So my advice to you this evening, my warning to you is this. If you cannot find the source of any research that you see quoted, if you can't answer those questions, who did it, when, what was the research, how was it carried out? If you can't answer those questions, do not quote research to anybody else until you've done that background check. Because research shows that 67% of research quoted by speakers is either incorrect or they've made it up on the spot just as a convenient way to round off a talk.